Thanks for making the time to be here. To all the Mayor's Council and everyone who's attending here from public and other TransLink staff, board members, thanks for joining us. And we are ready to dive into our agenda here, which begins with calling the meeting to order and adoption of the agenda. That's the revised agenda, October 17th, 2017. Any additions to the agenda? One piece to note is that Mayor Jackson is not able to be here today due to circumstance with her daughter, so she will, as mayors may know, so that item will not be on the agenda for today. That was on notice from our last meeting. So, anything else? What's that?
It's been revised.
You certainly can. She asked that it be moved to the next. So, with that, can I have a motion to move the agenda, adopt the agenda? Move for seconder for that. And all those in favor of adoption of the agenda? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. Minutes from September the 21st meeting. Any corrections to those minutes? Mover and seconder for the minutes. Okay, all those in favor of the minutes from our last meeting in September? Any opposed? And that carries. Thank you for that. So we're on to first item, which is a report of the Joint Committee on Transportation Planning and Funding. We have an update on that front from the committee, and Mayor Cote as the chair. Do you want to kick things off, or the co-chair, along with the TransLink board chair, Lorraine Sebastian? Mayor Cote?
Thank you, Chair. So the subcommittee has met once since our last Mayor's Council meeting to continue and advance the work we have with Phase 2 of the Mayor's 10-year plan. The discussions have been ongoing and I think have been productive with the new provincial government on the requirements that we're going to need to be able to move forward ahead with the second phase of the 10-year plan. The discussions have really kind of narrowed down to the local regional funding gap, which, as is in the report, is currently at between $60 to $80 million a year annually. As per previous directions from the Mayor's Council, this body has been focusing on the carbon tax and the new carbon tax that was recently announced by the provincial government as a source, as a real potential source of being able to address this funding gap. I think it's important to note that the funding request coming from the Mayor's Council on this portion is a portion of the carbon tax that is actually generated right here in Metro Vancouver and is actually generated through the transportation sector. So the request that we're making is not for a portion of the carbon tax that would come from other parts of the province or even other sectors unrelated to transportation. So I think we've got a pretty strong basis that new carbon tax revenue that is generated from the transportation sector here in Metro Vancouver can quite legitimately be applied to helping us move forward with some major transportation investments in the region. So this is what's being put forward to the provincial government. There's no doubt there's a lot of ongoing discussions that have to go towards that. On top of the funding gap, there's been a lot of engagement both with all of the municipalities in Metro Vancouver and provincial MLAs regarding Phase 2. As I think most people around this table have been involved in working group sessions to really dig deep into some of the specifics of Phase 2 and even moving beyond the major projects, the Broadway subway line and the light rail. Although those are two very important components of the 10-year plan, I think we all around this table recognize that there are many other important transportation investments and investments in our bus system which are critically important to make the transportation plan work. So this engagement both at the local level with municipal governments, but also with MLAs from all of the parties in the provincial government, I think are absolutely critical in making sure that we're able to maintain the support moving forward with this plan.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Great. Well, Jeff and I were going to just tag team through a couple of slides to add some detail to Committee Chair Cote's comments, but we'll try to keep it short because the report was in your agenda. This timeline slide that's where we want to kick things off. It doesn't look very much different than the last couple of updates we provided in timelines, which is actually a good sign of in itself. The timelines that we set a while ago were aggressive, but we thought were achievable, and they were designed to keep the vision on track and to avoid any more further costly delays. I think what's different now than perhaps 6 months ago or a year ago is that there's a real two-way dialogue happening between multiple levels of government, but especially between the Mayor's Council and TransLink and the province, which is something we haven't seen for many years. And in fact, there's I would say more formal partnership framework happening right now, led by what we'd call a principals table, bi-weekly meetings or conference calls between the chair and the co-chair of the Mayor's Council, the two ministers that have shared responsibility over TransLink and infrastructure and transportation, as well as the Premier's office, and they're then in turn supported by a senior officials table made up of senior officials at the provincial government, as well as Kevin Desmond here and his team. And then below that, there's a working officials table. They're actually, frankly, getting a lot of the work done, but with guidance from those two senior tables. So there's actually a formal partnership and working dialogue happening that we haven't seen. The red circle there is really highlighting what we've said, I think, quite a few times in the last few months, which is our expectation is that we can get to an agreement with the province on how we're going to fund the Phase 2 plan by the end of the year or early 2018, and we think that that's certainly achievable, and indeed it's an important milestone to enable us to keep us to the schedule we've outlined. Mayor Cote mentioned the pre-budget or the carbon tax ask that was contained in our pre-budget submission that we made to the BC Legislature's Select Standing Committee on Government Services and Finance. They're doing a public consultation process right now on the 2018 budget. So we made that submission on Monday to the committee. Our submission is now up on our website. I don't think the committee actually releases submissions that they receive until a week or two from now. So we wanted to make it public, so it's on there. In fact, there's some copies, including a backgrounder at the back there. These are our three quote-unquote asks, and these are these are part of the funding strategy that we've outlined for the Phase 2 plan over the last couple of years, but certainly in detail over the last couple of meetings. First is full support for the Patolo Bridge. The second is 40% capital contributions to all projects in the vision, not just the major projects like we've seen in the past, but all projects in the vision. This is a commitment that the government made originally during the election and has been made many times since then. And then finally, this component that Mayor Cote spoke to, a fair share of new carbon tax revenues generated by the proposed carbon tax increase they're in fact generated right here in Metro Vancouver by the transportation network. Now that's a mouthful, so we want to walk through the important components of the ask just briefly, especially for the public who may be just seeing it for the first time. Before I get into the ask component, I want to highlight or flag another important part of the submission, which is the one that outlines the benefits that the vision is going to deliver to help meet provincial objectives. This is really important because we're not proposing, and this council has never proposed, that the province give us a quote-unquote resources. We've always asked them to invest in this region, not just to help us meet our own regional priorities, but also to help the province themselves meet their own priorities, including around things, this is outlined in the submission, around areas like congestion and GHGs, goods movement, job creation, and really critically around affordability. These are objectives that we've laid out as a region, but these are also objectives of the province itself, including right in the consultation process for the 2018 budget have laid out as provincial priorities. So we're not looking for charity. We're looking for a partner to help us deliver on a set of priorities that we can't deliver on our own. We've always said that these transit investments of the type that we're talking about are really too large for any one order of government to deliver on their own, and that the vision is going to deliver benefits to all of BC. They're significant, and in fact, we don't think that the type of returns, the type of outcomes that will be delivered by the vision could be, in fact, easily or quickly met by any other provincial strategy or in any other region in BC. So we think we've got a pretty unique and strong value proposition for the province. So we want to move on to the details of our ask, and actually I want to start with, I don't want to start with what we're asking the province to invest. I actually want to start with what we're investing in our own vision, because that's in fact the most significant part of it. It's in fact, and I'm going to go through these details, this region is investing more of its own resources and revenues in delivering the vision than any other order of government. In fact, if you look at the life cycle costs, both capital and operating of the vision, this region will be paying for a larger share than both other senior governments combined. So I want to underline this. This region is the largest contributor towards the vision. We have, quote unquote, skin in the game, and I'm saying that because my experience with senior governments, as we get close to major funding approvals, is they start asking, well, do you have, quote unquote, skin in the game? We have more than skin in the game. This is our vision. We developed it, and we're the major funders of it. So in the phase one plan was a $2.1 billion plan. $1.5 billion of it came from new revenues that the Mayor's Council, this council, approved in November of 2016, including higher transit fares, a change to the property tax, a new regional development cost charge for transit, and then contribution from existing sources within TransLink. The phase two plan looks a little different because it's so capital intensive, but the bottom line is it's still our plan. It's still mostly funded by the region. And that's really important. As I said, as we go forward, you may hear from MLAs or others that, oh, well, you know, you're asking the province to solve all of your problems. That's not the case at all. So I'll let Jeff go into the details here, and because we want to really spell out how important it is for everyone to understand that this region is still the major contributor towards both this phase as well as the 10-year vision, but we need the province to be a partner in helping us with those last few steps.
Thanks, Mike. So just as comparison, I think it was clear you can see from the top level, and these are to scale, the order of magnitude of the capital program that was in phase one versus phase two, which is very significant because of the rapid transit projects, Patello, upgrades to Expo Millennium Line, et cetera. This is the largest chunk of capital required in the 10-year vision. And so you can see on the top level how that breaks down between the different orders of government. Then it's also necessary to consider that it's not just about the capital itself, it's how do we operate it. So the region is responsible for putting that out. What you'll notice in the bullets is so we need regional revenue sources to be able to pay for the debt service and for the capital in those blue boxes, as well as to be able to operate all of those services that are turned on by that. Now, there are significant revenues. The majority of the revenues will be generated by new transit fares, by allocation of TransLink surplus property that we're selling, by other resources that we'll have on the outer years of the plan to be able to contribute to that. So the remainder that is proposed to be coming from the carbon tax is well less than the majority. So it's probably on the order of about 40% of the total revenue need.
So just to emphasize that, so the regional funding gap that we've been talking about at $60 to $80 million is less than 50% of the regional share that the region would have to contribute under sort of a traditional one-third funding model, or whatever, 40%, 33%, and the remainder. We are already the majority funders of the regional funding share for the phase two plan. But as this council said many times, we don't want to increase property taxes to pay for major transit expansion. We need a new, fair, and a more affordable funding source. We've managed to identify, using existing resources without increasing any fares, taxes, or fees, more than half of the regional funding requirement. That remaining slice, the regional funding gap, is $60 to $80 million. That's the piece that we're looking to for the carbon tax.
So we've been working with provincial government on this, including doing some research on how the proposed increases to the carbon tax would play out as far as different allocation methods. So what you see before you is kind of our most current estimates of how different sectors contribute to the overall emissions of GHG and thus are paying for the actual tax. So from a provincial-wide perspective, Metro Vancouver, because it's smaller, urban, denser, doesn't produce as much GHG per capita or emit as much, on order of 30% of the provincial total. But transportation is the largest single sector of that, about a third of the regional emissions, which then accounts for 11% of the total emissions made in the province, compared to, as you see in the bottom right now, Metro Vancouver is 54% of the actual population. So per this details that Mayor Cote provided, what we are suggesting is if 11% of the new incremental carbon taxes that are generated from the series of $5 per ton increments over the next 4 years, as proposed by the provincial government, are allocated to the region for transportation investment to reduce GHG, that would be on the order of $90 million per year by the time the carbon tax had been increased by $20 per ton. So $5 per year. So it would grow from about $20 million a year up to $90 million, and then grow by about 1.5% to 2% per year after that. Per the points about where the regional gap sits right now, in the sort of 60 to 80 million in the near term, growing by kind of inflationary factors, this aligns fairly well to where we are at to be able to advance the next phase of the vision.
So, so before we move on, actually, I think we're moving on to other topics. I don't know, Chair, if you wanted to pause here to if there are any questions about the submission. Otherwise, there's a few other items related to Phase 2. But I did just want to end off on this slide by reemphasizing that our ask for a share of the carbon tax is a longstanding one that we actually originally made in 2011. It's one that's been endorsed by a wide range of stakeholders and important voices in the region. And then, as I said earlier, this investment by the province of a share of the new provincial carbon tax, we believe will net the province a better return on its own objectives than almost any other strategy they could have, and certainly any other region that any other region in the province could offer, because we have this vision. It's ready to go. We spent years developing it and designing it. It really is ready to go. You may certainly hear from MLAs and others about asking about, well, if we provide Metro Vancouver region with a share of the new carbon tax, won't that be an argument for all regions across the province to make that case? Won't the provinces won't they just have to give away all and sundry of the new carbon tax? We're not asking for an allocation-based share of the carbon tax. We're making a case that the share of the carbon tax be invested in this region because of the return it's going to provide to the province to generate towards provincial objectives. This isn't a handout, and this has been the position of the Mayor's Council for years, that building transit in major city regions like Metro Vancouver or Toronto or Montreal or Calgary, Edmonton, the others, is a big enough challenge with significant enough benefits that actually extend well beyond the region that it requires provincial partnership. This is a fairly unique kind of investment, and it's one that's too large for any one order of government to deliver. So we're suggesting this is good policy, this is strong policy, and this is going to return benefits both to this region and to the province.
Questions on this so far? Mayor Brody.
Given the attitude of the government, previous government that we have encountered, as you say, we've been trying this one on since 2011. Do we have, or can we talk about a plan B?
Well, certainly. I mean, we actually have a list of possible revenue tools that could be used. Carbon taxes are always been on there. Others include the vehicle registration fee, an increase to the fuel tax. Those are actually all part of our election platform. They're part of our 90-day ask. So they're certainly all options the province could and should consider. The other one that we've talked about in the past at this council is the future disposition of the Golden Ears Bridge. Now that without tolls, the province, as you know, has made a short-term agreement with TransLink to quote-unquote keep us whole by providing operating subsidies to the bridge to make up for the loss of toll revenues. That could be another, but of course on top of that we're also paying about $30 million a year in subsidies, the shortfall between toll revenues and operating costs for that bridge. There could be an opportunity there for them to take on some of those, since they're in effect the majority government responsible for the bridge. So we have a couple of other plan Bs for sure, but I think my advice is that we should focus all of our efforts on securing what even for example, the Minister of Finance herself has offered to be a suitable use of a portion of the carbon tax. So we think this is a pretty good plan A.
Director Harris.
Thanks very much. I'm supportive of what's happening here. I just have two questions for clarification. One is, if a carbon tax works well, then people will drive less. And I just wanted some assurance from staff on how that was taken into account. And my second question was the graph, the chart before that, which is the different shares of funding that included. And go back again. That one. That included the provincial government share. I just wondered what assumptions you're making about the Patello Bridge operating funding in that one, because of course that was originally proposed as tolls, but now it isn't. Thank you.
Sure. Why don't I take the first question, and maybe I'll ask Jeff to answer the second. So in your first one, you're right. The carbon tax is designed explicitly not to grow necessarily with the economy and inflation. It's designed to grow or shrink depending on the emissions profile. So after the $5 per year for 4-year set of increases come in between now and 2022, our modeling suggests that, or at least we're assuming that the carbon tax, provincial carbon tax revenues will stop growing, and in fact over the long term may decline. So what we've proposed in the budget submission is that what we're calling the Metro Vancouver Transit Carbon Tax Transfer Program includes includes an index so that transfer grows at least with inflation. This would actually be modeled on the federal gas tax fund program, which is both a legislative program, which I think is probably another important component, so it provides us with long-term certainty. But the federal gas tax fund also includes an index so that municipalities around this table, local governments, Metro Vancouver, know that fund is actually increasing over time, because of course our costs increase in our case by inflation and population growth. So that would be our suggestion. Jeff will have some comments too on actually how the carbon tax increase affects our own fuel tax revenues, because of course that will have an effect, and then I'll let him answer your second question.
So we do know that there is some elasticity by raising the carbon taxes, de facto also a fuel tax increase, and so that would reduce our projected fuel tax increases. Right now our estimate is on the order of about $3 million per year, and we're generating about $380 million per year. So it's not large, but it is notable enough. To Mike's point too, that the projection that had already been that fuel tax would be flat or declining over time. So we need to kind of keep on top of that. The provincial government has not yet projected what the carbon tax revenues would be outside of the first 3 years of when they did the update. So we'll have to see what that looks like. As far as on this section related to Patello Bridge, the 40% commitment to the capital of the bridge is shown credited in the provincial government account, if you will, above there. The remaining 60% that would be generated by tolls right now is shown in the regional account. That needs to be hammered out, but the request is that the provincial government would keep us whole in lieu of tolls.
In which case the green portion would grow and the blue portion would shrink.
In likelihood, yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Corrigan.
Yeah, I think that there are a lot of gaps in the logic of the funding proposals that come forward. First of all, we have only a 10-year guarantee on the gas tax, because if you'll remember at the Metro Board meeting, the diversion of the gas tax funds to TransLink occurred as a result of a one-vote majority. It was probably one of the closest votes that were ever held in Metro government. So we've got a limited time in which that capital is going to be coming through from the gas tax with no guarantee, given the vote in the last instance, that will continue after that point. Carbon tax and gas tax are both reducing if we are doing the right things, and the whole idea is to reduce the usage of gas and the usage of carbon, is both of those are funding sources that are going to gradually decrease over time. Additionally, the expectation is that it's going to be compensated for by regular increases by the provincial government in regard to the carbon tax without paying much attention to how that impacts the economy. It's mindful of when the TransLink board some years ago decided that we were going to spend $6 million counting all the parking spaces in the Lower Mainland. And we counted all the parking spaces dutifully on the basis that the government would give us a parking tax in that regard. They decided the politics, once business began to push back, they decided the politics weren't good in that, and the $6 million was entirely wasted, and that money didn't come into the system. So, you know, I think that we count a lot on what are the vagaries of the political system at a provincial and federal level in making long-term commitments that aren't necessarily sustainable. The last thing I want to say, I want to reiterate, I've been doing a lot of construction projects over the course of many years, and I can tell you in my city now, this is another record year for construction in our city, is that it's probably going to hit $1 billion, and we're only 10% of the region. We have major projects coming on, you know, significant major projects coming on, not the least of which is the proposed Kinder Morgan line. We have additionally the treatment plant in the Lions Gate. And then TransLink is stepping up to the plate and planning to accomplish the Patello Bridge, the Broadway line, and the Surrey line contemporaneously. I don't believe for even a moment that we have the capacity to be able to take on those projects. I don't believe that this organization can ramp up to handle 3 projects that would probably tax the resources of the provincial government to be able to accomplish simultaneously. Not only that, but it flies in the face of Keynesian economics, because what it does is say, in a superheated economy where construction is significant, we're going to add in massive additional construction projects to compete with ourselves. That means that prices are going to go up significantly because there is a limitation on the available resources here in British Columbia. Even if we look internationally, being able to simultaneously do all those projects is almost impossible. Ramping up an office at TransLink that's going to be able to manage 3 massive engineering projects over the next years is, again, an issue that I think has not been discussed in any depth at these meetings to be able to look at what the real ramifications are. There are orderly progressions that can be made in taking on major capital projects, segueing from one project into another, utilizing your opportunities for the workforce in a more efficient way. It's not even being contemplated here because what's driving this isn't good planning, it's good politics. It's the idea that Vancouver can't be ahead of Surrey, Surrey can't be ahead of Vancouver, the emergent issue is really the Patello Bridge. And so as a result, all of these politics are going to drive us into expending far more of the public money than we should be expending by taking on way too much at the same time. I want to lay that out because I don't want to, as a politician, not have raised those issues and said, it's your obligation to think about that. You know, what I'm saying is logical, and you need to stop and think about what you're undertaking before you go down a path that's going to leave a legacy for future politicians that's unsustainable. So I want to make those comments, and I realize the pressure on the staff at TransLink to deliver on all these different fronts is there, but I think that we're the ones who have to step back and be far more logical about what we're doing.
Thank you, Mayor Corrigan. And we're ready to go to the next part of this, which is back to phase 1?
No, it's still phase 2.
We're still phase 2. So why don't we hold questions till we get through
Sure.
these?
Thanks, Chair. So just to wrap this up, the process. So we're still using estimates because we're in the engagement process and phase with you, with senior staff from each of the municipalities in Metro Vancouver, as well as we've started engagement with provincial MLAs on what the phase 2 and the remainder of the vision looks like. We'll be completing that next week in Victoria with the NDP caucus. We completed the third of sessions with yourselves and with your CAOs and transportation directors yesterday. We will then be bringing all of the input that we had, taking that forward with options and analysis on what we heard vis-a-vis the kind of proposed service plan and investments back through the Planning and Funding Committee and then to the respective bodies for direction. That would then allow us to kind of finalize what the overall phase 2 investment plan would look like, both from a capital and operating and the exact regional gap figures down to, you know, the millions and the decimal places, and to then also have the basis for what we would engage with the public on for input on what those service plans investments would look like over the remaining years. So we would be suggesting that on the timeline we're on right now, that we would be out in the public as early as January and February in order to bring together the final investment plan for your consideration probably in February or March of next year. I wanted to do a quick update on the Patello Bridge, which is, as Mayor Corrigan noted, our #1 priority. We're working with the provincial government on trying to finalize a framework agreement between them and TransLink in order to be able to replace the bridge per the suggestions and requests that Mike went over. So 40% of the capital and then a guarantee for the subsidy for our debt servicing on the remainder in lieu of the tolls that otherwise would have happened. So we're looking for a commitment by the end of October and appear to be making good progress. The business case, the draft business case was submitted back in September, and we've been working through the technical questions from senior staff at the Ministry of Transportation and Infrastructure. I can give a quick update on requests for funding from the federal government. We had alerted you previous meetings that under the new Trade Corridors Fund under Transport Canada that looks at port facilities and port cities and bottlenecks. We put an expression of interest in for the Patello Bridge for about $200 million of funding, capital funding. We were screened in earlier this month, which then leads us to putting a comprehensive submission in by the first week of November. So if successful, that would thus mean that we would have additional $200 million that we would require less subsidy from the provincial government on. We're complete.
Okay.
Sure.
We're good on that one. And we need a motion to receive that report. So that moved and seconded. Thank you. All those in favor of receipt? Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. We go to the phase 1. Update on the phase 1 investment plan.
So, Chair, in your package, item 2.2 is an update on the Regional Transportation Development Cost Charge memo to the Mayor's Council. Just go over very quickly where we're at with that and then take any questions on this. So, as you're aware, this is unresolved business from the Phase 1 investment plan. A request has been made of the provincial government for the necessary legislative changes, which are basically to include transit as an eligible category for development cost charges. That's the simplest piece of this. Right now, under provincial legislation, roads and other infrastructure are, but transit has not been included, even though it is in other provinces within Canada. So the remit of the Mayor's Council and the Board was for staff to go away and work on options on how to design this. You'll see there's a summary framework page included in your package as Appendix A of that report. There are basically sort of 7 policy issues that we needed to work through and to provide options to you on how this would be designed. So there's the understanding of what would be necessary from the provincial government to legislate, but then there are the bylaws and the design that would be necessary for actually implementing it. We've made very good progress working with a municipal group comprised of 10 municipalities in Metro Vancouver and UBC that have been helping us work through this with consultants. We've had several engagement workshops, a very large one yesterday with I think 18 of the 21 municipalities participating, as well as the provincial government observing. So we're getting, I would say we've made our way through about 6 of the 7 key policy questions that were laid out. We are working through with the development sector. As of Monday, we're going to be doing a workshop with them as well to work through this. And then we'll be coming forward with options through the Planning and Funding Committee and then to this body on how it would be designed. The remaining piece of real discussion is how it is structured as far as whether or not there is a tiered or just a region-wide basis. And we know there's a very strong difference of opinion at all levels, both at staff and probably around this body as well. So what we're doing is collecting all the perspectives, how it meets the objectives of being fair and being simple and easy to understand, and then give you those trade-offs. If you will recall, the charge to us in phase 1 was to basically design a development cost charge that could generate on the order of $20 million a year to recover a small portion of the capital costs of the vision that are associated with the growth imposed on the system. So our analysis at that time had shown that that was reasonable level to be able to attain without changing the affordability of housing within the region, so not slowing down the rate of development and flipping individual parcels across the region. We're still working on that. We'll bring you forward options. Just as a target rate for apartments, which are the vast majority of growth going forward in the future, that was on the order of about $1,000 per unit. So we're looking at how that might range between the different options, and we will report back in November and December looking to conclude that process by the end of this year. That's my report on that.
Okay, any questions on the phase 1? Director Harris?
Just a quick one. I know staff are working on this, but I'd appreciate reports back on the UBC and UEL areas, because since they're developing quickly and are a transit destination, they're going to need special attention in the legislation if we're going to collect in those areas.
Yes.
And they're different. So I just wanted to flag that for other members of this council, but I think that would bear recognition somewhere, or highlighting if we could, please. Thank you.
We'll report back, Chair.
Okay. Any other questions? Phase 1 update. A mover and seconder receipt of that report. Moved and seconded. All those in favor, receipt. Any opposed? That carries. Thank you. So we're on to report of TransLink management, our usual report. That's page 23 in our package. And Jeff, are you going to go with this?
We're going to keep it lean this week, given all the other things that are on the, or this month on the agenda, Chair, so I'm going to go through it. If there are any questions, obviously Kevin can help me with this. A couple of items. We have been monitoring the effects of the toll removal since the beginning of September on both the Golden Ears Bridge and on the Patello Bridge. So what you see before you is the most current figures for the month of September, for the full month of September in the case of Patello Bridge, Port Mann, and Golden Ears. It is for the first 2 weeks for Massey Tunnel and Alex Fraser. We didn't have the complete month for you. We are starting to see stabilization between what we saw in the first couple of weeks. It was obviously over a holiday weekend and then people starting to go back to work and school, so it has sorted out. It was a little bit unpredictable in the first week or two, but you can still see that it remains, the patterns are generally the same as what we were showing, the overall sort of storyline, on the order of about 30,000 more vehicles per day are crossing those 3 bridges that work really as a set, Golden Ears Bridge, Port Mann, and Patello, with increases obviously on Port Mann on the order of about 24%, similar for Golden Ears Bridge, and then reduction of about 10% during the weekday on Patello Bridge. I will say on the weekends, it's even a little bit larger, the discrepancy, partly because there is more discretionary traffic, so we would have predicted that that would happen. We are still working on what this means in terms of reliability of trips and on travel times for certain kinds of trips. We know some are faster, some are slower. Obviously, for Patello Bridge trips, those people using that crossing have probably seen a reduction in their travel time. Anecdotally, we've heard the opposite for some people using the Port Mann Bridge because of increased congestion or potentially collisions, et cetera. So we are doing a study that would allow us to do before and after on those travel times, be able to report back to you to get a better understanding about what we're now dealing with, how that would be impacted by mobility pricing, to be able to provide that information to the independent commission as they consider it, as well as what our needs are on the system. The corollary to that is what are the impacts on the transit services. It's worth noting that we've been obviously in an incredibly strong growth period on the transit system for the last 2 years. What we're seeing right now, and it still is fairly early, these patterns can take a little bit of time to change, but we haven't seen a significant change in the rate of growth on the bus routes that are crossing the Fraser Highway. The Fraser River. Those are listed there. We also have not seen a noticeable change on the Sky Bridge, the Sky train that's coming over parallel to Patello Bridge. So maybe a little bit of dampening compared to the what I would say was explosive growth on some of those services, but so far they continue to be strong. As a point of reference, year over year through the end of September, ridership is up on the order of 7%, coming on the heels of 4.5% for 2016. So as I mentioned, this will take a little bit of time. Substitutes for whether or not you own a car, buy a car, or use transit can take years to resolve themselves. But so far, it's not having a huge impact on that system-wide growth. I want to alert you, we're heading into the next phase of the fare policy review. So this is a 4-phase process. The first 2 phases were complete over the course of the last year, and were done primarily online and have been probably our most intensive consultation process in terms of the number of people that have participated. It is our biggest touch point with our customers in many ways, so that is to be anticipated. We are preparing to go into public consultation in November and December on this 3rd phase in order to thus refine and get down to some really very specific proposals on what we can do to deliver a more exceptional customer experience, leveraging the technology of the Compass card. Yet making sure that it's simple, fair, affordable, and helps to grow ridership. So those are the objectives that the Board and the Mayor's Council have seen of what we're trying to do. We are building on the fact that not everybody agrees that the current system that we have is optimal for that and is the foundation for achieving those goals. This is what we saw from those first rounds of consultation where over 30,000 people participated. One of the first bullet is really associated with the boundary issues, the zone boundary issues, when you're making short trips and you trigger that 2-zone trip. So a lot of people thus go to the second bullet about some interest in seeing if we can explore more of a distance-based approach for at least part of the transit system. And then also looking at time of day discounts. We have some form of time of day discount right now on the system, with it being 1 zone basically in the evenings, but that does not apply if you are only traveling 1 zone. And there are also potentially opportunities in the midday where this system is less busy and there is capacity. There's also a strong interest in what discounts and how we structure this, especially around low-income individuals and making sure that there's affordable access to the transit system. So in round 3 and phase 3, we will be looking at these sort of 3 questions about whether or not there is support for pricing by distance, a couple of options on that. What are the different fare products that we can explore, fare capping versus monthly passes, those kinds of things, and then what customer discounts and at what levels should we be offering into the future. As in previous rounds, we'll be offering a workshop with the Mayor's Council. I know a number of you participated previously. That will be probably mid-November, just as we prepare to go out for the public part. That concludes my report, Chair.
Okay, thank you. Start with Mayor Hepner and Mayor Clay.
Thank you. Jeff, does it matter at all if we're seeing less traffic on the Patello Bridge and that were to be consistent over time? Does it change the urgency at all in any way relative to the project, a replacement project?
The short answer, Mayor Hepner, is no. The primary need is to replace the bridge because of the structural end of life, basically. It's an 80-year-old bridge that was designed to be 50 years old, or 50 years. So we have maintained it and are keeping it in a state of good repair. But as we said, we need to replace it by 2023. The size and the connections, those are some of the things that we're continuing to monitor. We had been assuming that it would be a tolled facility, and adding tolls to that bridge would have resulted in a shift of traffic as well. So that would have pushed some of the traffic to Port Mann, similar to thus removing tolls on Port Mann Bridge. So what we're doing right now is recalibrating what those volumes look like. If you recall, we were over 80,000 vehicles a day. We're now into the low 70s, so we dropped about 10,000, or mid-70s, somewhere around there. Our projections are still, because of growth in Surrey and in the economy in general, that will continue to climb a bit.
Sure.
Just one follow-up on relative to the bridge, Jeff, if I could. The application that we have made to the federal government relative to the potential of that being included, and we're into the we've been screened in. Are we utilizing that as a full spectrum project in that application?
Mayor Hebner, yes, so that is applying for funds that would help us construct both the bridge, recognizing that the bridge, about 10% of the volumes are actually truck volumes. It's over 1 million crossings a year are made by trucks, so it has a really essential piece in the goods movement and the port facilities, as well as connections to South Fraser Perimeter Road. A direct connection heading south is advantageous from a travel time perspective and reducing costs associated with that. So we've identified both of those as potential funding scope.
And we identify the east side as well?
We've identified the whole project.
The whole project. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Mayor Clay is next.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know about 80 years, Jeff, but at 50, things are just hitting the prime of their life. So there's should be designing for longer. My concern was the slide that went up there, and unless I'm completely talking to the wrong people, it said 70% of the people supported distance pricing. 100% of the people I talked to would prefer the system was one zone across. And I'm wondering if this got caught up in that conversation where, particularly on the North Shore, people were saying, well, if I use one form of transport, I'm in one zone, like on a bus now. But if I go on the sea bus or something else, you're dinging me for two zones. And I'm wondering if the question and the answers are not in the right context, because I don't believe 7 out of 10 people would want a distance-based fare system, especially when we're always hearing from south of the Fraser that they're being treated unfairly for living where they do, and that they're paying multiple zones. Like, is that something that you're going to dig deeper into, at least as you move forward?
Yes, Mayor Clay, we've been trying to dig as deep as we can, because obviously if you ask people what they'd like to pay less. So the premise of this is that we're trying to retain roughly the same amount of revenue that we generate, recognizing the previous conversation about how difficult it is to generate additional revenues to subsidize the system. So we're trying to, whatever new system we bring forward, replace that. So as such, if we were to look at flattening the fare system, making it one price, we would in effect have to actually raise that lower fare on the order of, I think our analysis was by about 16 to 17%. So if you're right now traveling one zone and paying $2.75, you would have to add 40 cents to that fare in order for everybody to pay the same thing. And that's where people, if given that choice, they would prefer some level of distance-based.
Well, again, I think a lot of it's in the framing of the question. If you went down onto the Broadway corridor and asked people, what do you think? They're going to say, no, don't do that. But if you went to what's it called, Cargill or whatever out in Langley or Surrey, they would say, oh no, why am I paying so much more? And I think a lot of that came up in the conversation where people were seeing someone beside them doing kind of the same thing, paying less money. So they're like, well, that's not fair. But I hope we dig deeper into that, where it's not, and then it's not just one group of riders that are going 3 or 4 blocks that are dictating the whole system for how we're going to work.
Chair, we will be providing all that information on who's saying this and where. It is worth noting that it's not just in the Burrard Peninsula where people would want distance-based. Actually, the majority of trips are shorter one-zone trips regardless where you are in the region. Even if you're in Surrey, the majority of those trips are actually within Surrey. So thinking about how that applies to any new form, we'll bring forward that analysis, Mayor Clay.
Okay, Mayor Smith, followed by Mayor Stewart.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, so now we've got a chart that shows 2/3 of the people disagree that the current fare system works well. So you could imply that 2/3 of our customers are dissatisfied. Can I see the next chart about how long we're taking to react to this? We go from, I think it's third quarter of the chart you had before. Yeah, okay, so now we've concluded that 2/3 of our customers are not happy, and we're going from late 2017 to mid-2018 before we can make recommendations for change. I mean, in the private sector, if 2/3 of your customers are not happy and you wait 9 months to react, you're not going to stay in business very long. Now, I realize that the public sector is a different world than the lean, mean, and highly efficient private sector, but nevertheless, if this was my business, I would certainly give a strong wake-up call to my management team and my board of directors if I found out it was going to take them 9 months to adjust something that should be relatively as simple as a fare structure. They've got it done they've already said they've got their broad range of options and everything else. They've done all their group ropes and their hugging and information sessions. Why are we taking 9 months to come up with a system to react to an obvious problem?
Chair, Mayor Smith, you sound like my CEO, who asked the same question of us on this. We are pushing as quickly as we can would be the answer. You're right, we're different than private versus public. If we do not get this right and we come forward with a fare system and we haven't modeled it correctly and we're off by 5% on $600 million of revenue, then we could be short $30 million a year. And so understanding the best that we can how people would react to it, model it, make sure that we're comfortable with whatever we're putting forward. I will qualify and say the vast majority of people are very happy with the service they get. What we're suggesting is here's the fare system that we have, and given the opportunities and objectives, could we make it better? And that's where the majority of people are agreeing that we could make it better. We are moving this, we're getting into the pointy part of this now, so in the fare policy review, people will get to see specific trips, what it costs, et cetera, so we'll be able to move more quickly. Even working with our Compass, it will take months, whatever recommendation we get to, just to figure out how to code it, et cetera. Absolutely.
Mayor Stewart.
Thank you. I just wanted to balance a comment made by Mayor Clay. That's why I hear all the time that distance-based would be better than the current system. I know people have walked from Millardville across the Grand Overpass to get on Skytrain in Westminster rather than these extra zone. For some reason, Fort Moody doesn't find it to be a problem, but perhaps when Mayor Clay matures a little, will realize it. Because he's so youthful now. That they'll also realize that at 58, things start to creak and groan a bit more. Distance-based would solve all kinds of challenges in the suburbs because for almost every trip and equipment you have, if you're going anywhere, if you're trying to get to the Royal Colonial Hospital by Skytrain, we're still a kilometer and a half up the road. You can see it from here, but it's 2 zones away.
Okay, I've got Mayor Corrigan next.
Thank you. I was fascinated by the dissension among the 3 people. I wanted to just comment with regards to the
trips are, I mean, logically, the longer the trips are, the more those trips cost. But the more urgent it is for people to utilize transit in the longer trips, because those are the ones that have the greatest benefits by reducing carbon on the road. So there's a reason that you want to encourage people to make those longer trips on transit to ensure that they're not deterred. You kind of create a big problem in this issue when you end up saying, all right, we made this decision at a provincial level, which, you know, it's always the issue that we have to be aware of, that there can be quantum changes at the provincial level. Taking the tolls off has changed the game significantly. That people are buying cars now because they're not paying tolls, and they're making choices to utilize their vehicles, and they're making choices as to which bridge they use as a result of that. They're going to use the more modern bridge than the older bridge if they're going to pay less. And so the combination of elements that we've got out there are going to make it very challenging to be able to cope with it. We start increasing significantly distance-based fares so that if you are living 40 kilometers outside the city, you're going to pay significantly more. We're going to get to buy more cars because we reduce the price of tolls. And if we don't subsidize them by having shorter fares pay more, is that we're going to end up in a situation where we lose ridership in exactly the areas that are meant to reduce carbon. So we get more cars coming through our community from other areas of the lower mainland. This is the area that we actually do have responsibility for. You know, there's not many things that we're given responsibility for. This is the one area that is our baby because we took this off of the commissioner, if I recollect. And this is one of the functions that came to us legislatively with the Liberal government. One of the many curses is we got the two things that we were allowed to do is to set executive wages and to set fares. Great negotiations on that. And so now we're in a situation where we really do have to pay attention to this. And I noted as we were looking into the information we got, is one's 70%, one's two-thirds, one's strong support. It's really hard to compare when you're using different descriptions for each of the different elements in the program. Some they're a percentage, some they're a fraction, and some they're just anecdotal. So I'm really concerned that we've got to roll up our sleeves on this one and get down to really discussing among us what's going to happen with fares. Of course, everybody wants fares reduced. You know, obviously we want fares reduced, but we are constrained in the system from having to deliver on having a package of fares that is going to be able to support this very ambitious upscaling system, and that's going to be required in the long run. So I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater on this, and I think we really have to sit down and talk about exactly what we're trying to accomplish with our fares and what the unintended consequences will be if we make decisions that are going to force people to pay significantly more to distance travel.
Okay, thank you. Mayor Burr is next.
Thanks. I was interested to hear that we are at the pointy end, notwithstanding the schedule that Mayor Smith is cavilling about. It seemed to me that with the advent of Compass, we have an opportunity to do something quite innovative, and that is time-based billing, or even the logical extension of that, speed-based billing. Whether it's dynamic or not, I don't know, but would not people be more prepared to pay for a faster journey than a longer journey or a flat rate? Is that under consideration at all?
Mayor Boer, not exactly. So we looked at by service type, which would be probably a proxy for speed, I think, which is what you're getting at. So SkyTouring trips are generally faster because there's a separated right-of-way, or West Coast Express for the same. So that was part of what was looked at in Phase 2. We'll be reporting out on what we heard based on that. Certainly time of day would be. Right now we do have caps on your travel time, et cetera, so exploring that will be part of the future thing. So I think there will be a chance, just to the points that Mayor Corrigan made about to roll your sleeves up and go through all of what we saw in Phase 2, what the trade-offs are about going forward. Business as usual, so the status quo is an option to maintain. We could make smaller changes, so we already have distance-based on the rail. We could evolve that, but continue to have flat on the bus as well. Those are all options that we'll look at. And I think getting to the point of what's comprehensible, simple to understand, but is fair, is where the challenge and the balance will be for this table to debate.
Okay, Mayor Baldwin's next.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'm mindful of an analogy that I thought might be somewhat applicable, and that was a number of years ago. There was a case put forward by the railways to reduce the amount of property taxes they were paying in local governments. So the simplistic way of putting it was that they argued in the courts that a foot of track in Bigger Saskatchewan is worth as much as a foot of track in downtown Vancouver, because without that foot of track, the train can't operate. And so the courts bought that argument, and so they reduced the amount of that could be charged to the railways by municipalities. And it was a huge blow to the local government's coffers at that time. But if you take that argument and you extrapolate it into the system, you can say, well, you know, the fact that you have a short haul and a long haul, you're still going to have the same system operating. And so the difference isn't that much greater to go a long ways as it is to go a short ways. You still have to have the track stuff, the trains, you still have the operators, the maintenance systems, and so on. So I think hearing what's been said about the single fare, that probably that's the way to go. But I also hear what Jeff is saying about the impact on the budget. So you can't have a huge change in the budget quickly, but incrementally you can do that. So if we have an end game where we say, you know, it makes the most sense to go with a single fare, but we're not going to achieve it in 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, we're going to achieve it over 10 years or whatever, then maybe that would be more acceptable. That's along the recent Nobel Prize winner, nudging the things along, I guess you would say. So small incremental changes are easier to accept than big ones, and certainly present less of a downside should something go wrong. So maybe that would be the way to go, is to have a long-term plan and gradually move to achieve that, as opposed to trying to achieve it in a real quick manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Keating's next.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I guess my only suggestion is that really we're trying to do two things with fares. On the one hand, we're trying to change behavior. On the other hand, we're trying to get some money to fund a system. And I think we should look at the relative values of those sorts of things. And I would say that the actually biggest return is in changing behavior, to the extent that while it adds to our transportation infrastructure budget at some end, it saves at another end on the road side. And so I would give if you're having a fare review, I'd give the biggest discount to those people who are regular users or who could be made regular users, and there's a greater incentive to become regular users. And I know there's some discount that you get for being more frequent now, but I think we should emphasize that. But to Mayor Baldwin's point, I think if you want to have capital out of that, that's going to come from those people who are the occasional users, and you should have.
And asserted that TransLink government is unique in the world and not in a good way. And accountability to the population being served is almost completely missing. Given the poor track record that for-profit corporations have for service quality, my report suggests that bringing TransLink in-house, insourcing is the term that's sometimes used, needs to be seriously looked at. And under the appointed TransLink board, that has not happened. I think my time is probably up, and I know that I can't get all the contents of this report in 5 minutes, so I brought a copy for each of you and hopefully a few extra for TransLink staff.
Okay, thanks very much for being here. And you can. Okay, we can pass those around. Thank you. We're going to hear from our other next delegate, Mr. Joel Gibbs is next up. We don't have questions and answer with delegates typically. That's welcome, Mr. Gibbs.
Good morning. I come to you today as a transit advocate, as well as someone who advocates for cost-effective and cost-responsible transit projects. I'd like to talk about the Broadway extension. Of course, as all of you probably know, the plans at this point seem to be to essentially tunnel the whole project. Pre the business case is looking to cost, per TransLink reports, about $2 billion for that 5.5-kilometer extension out to Arbutus. The thing I'd like you to consider is for SkyTrain, we have a long record of having elevated systems. One of the reasons for those is they are vastly cheaper than tunneled projects. I've asked this question a couple times of TransLink staff at various events, and the only answer I've gotten is not in detail, just saying, oh, it's not technically feasible to build an elevated system essentially from BCC Clark going out. However, of course, in the comparisons that were done, light rail was still a consideration for the most recent comparison before it was completely decided on to build SkyTrain technology the whole way. And so, yeah, that's what I'd like to talk to you about. With that $2 billion, it costs approximately $363 million per kilometer on a 5.5-kilometer extension. However, numbers from previous lines that have been built, for example, the Evergreen extension cost roughly $130 million per kilometer, and that included a 2-kilometer bored tunnel. And as well, the Millennium Line was roughly $60 to $70 million per kilometer, and so the costs, of course, are far lower than 363. For that same $2 billion, that at an elevated system, that could go all the way from BCC Clark to UBC, and that would only cost $1.25 billion. So there'd be $750 million still remaining after that, of which you could do things like the SFU gondola that have been proposed. Or something even a little bit more new projects, I guess, like the Mayor of North Vancouver proposed a couple months ago, building a gondola from Waterfront over to Lonsdale, and having a higher capacity, much more frequent than C-bus systems there. And so, yeah, that's what I would like you to consider today is an elevated system. I never received any response besides, oh, it's not technically possible. All the analysis I've done based on the grades is that it's possible for an elevated system to be able to achieve those, partly because it is not trying to be built into an existing framework. Since it will be a totally new line, it has some flexibility as far as exact routing and distance to achieve the necessary grades that SkyTrain is capable of. And so, yeah, just consider that and consider the cost effectiveness of something like an elevated system over tunneled, as in the short term, instead of waiting an indefinite period, going only to Arbutus in an indefinite period, then to go on to UBC, which, as we've seen with the Millennium Line from back in the early 2000s, it can take years and years before anything will ever come of a possible extension for that. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for being here before the Mayor's Council. Thanks, both of you, for joining us. As I had mentioned earlier, we don't have the revised notice of motion from Mayor Jackson, which was to be next on the agenda. So, other business, one key piece is next meeting, November 16th, is our next public meeting here at TransLink. And certainly there'll be more to report on with respect to our 10-year plan and the next phases rolling out from here. So that's it for today's business at the public meeting, and we'll look for a motion to go into closed session. Over in a seconder. Thank you. Any discussion? All those in favor? Any opposed? That carries. So we are adjourned. Thanks everyone for attending. We'll see you in a month's time, and we'll take a start right at 10:30 sharp. Mayor's Council.